Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you can see me. My name is Elena, and I'm the strategy lead and co-founder at BuildUp. I know we have a bunch of people joining us online. We've got some people here in person in London as well. And if you're joining us online, you should have had a notification that this is also being recorded so that others can watch it later. So just very quickly to let you know who else is with us today. So we have Megan Grazier, who is with BuildUp and has been doing a lot of work on Sudan and many other places, but also will be managing all of the questions coming through the online participants. So if you are participating online, then at the bottom of your screen, you should have a Q&A button that you can use to drop your questions in there. The chat isn't enabled, so please do use the Q&A if you have any questions, and you can drop them in there anytime throughout the presentation, and we will pick them up at the end. And then also joining us is Hussam Abdel Fattah, who is the Sudan lead at BuildUp. He will be presenting the key findings from these thematic reports that we're going to be discussing today. And then Ethad Ahmed, who's a research practitioner working on social and environmental impact. She's also one of the authors of one of the thematic reports, and her work spans socio-environmental initiatives and examining how media influences societies. At the moment, she's focusing on disinformation, hate speech, and social media listening, showing how harmful narratives and misinformation affect communities, opportunities, and social cohesion in fragile settings. Thanks, Ethad, for joining us. And Ethad is going to act as our discussant. So once Hussam has presented the findings from these 5 reports, she will be providing some reflections and initial comments on it. Once we finish this initial presentation, our hope is to also get your reflections here in the room, also online for anyone joining us. So questions, absolutely, but if you also have a reflection, you can also post in the Q&A, and we'd love to hear those. The reports we're going to be presenting haven't been published yet. We actually wanted to have this event first to hear what people's reactions are to some of the findings that we're coming across, so that we can also make sure that if there's anything else that we should be addressing, if there's other aspects of the narrative that we should be digging deeper into, that we can do that in the final sprint to have these published. So you're first to hear them. So I think I'm going to start with, there we go. I'm going to start with a little definition before we move on to Hussam presenting the actual findings. So we said that this was about understanding information warfare in Sudan. And so I thought it was important that we open by explaining what we understand information warfare to mean. So at BuildUp, we have been working for over a decade at this intersection of technology and conflict. And one part of that means that we work with mediators and with peace builders to think about how to use technology to make peace processes more inclusive and more participatory. But the other aspect of it is that we spend a lot of time thinking about how technology is impacting conflict dynamics and drivers of conflict. And sometimes we think of this as information warfare. And the reason we think of it that way is because it's not just about thinking through what content online is illegal or banned by a platform's terms of services. It's actually about understanding what is happening on social media platforms particularly, but on digital media in general, that really has an impact on the way people experience conflict. And so we divide it into these 3 categories. I mean, there's many ways you could understand it, but this is how we think through it. So we think about manipulation tactics online. So that's anything from coordinated behavior, inauthentic accounts, or engineered virality designed to deceive. So you basically have, an army of bots that is pushing a narrative, but that's not actually representative of what people in conflict are hearing or feeling. So that's one aspect of it. We also think about it as narrative threat or information threats, sometimes people call it, which is really focusing on pushing out stories that dehumanize or legitimize violence or erode the conditions for peace, even when each post is technically legal or allowed by the terms of service. So we find a lot of content in this category where it's too subtle for platforms to take it down, but we know that it's contributing to this narrative threat overall. And then we think about polarization. So this is content that hardens group identities and, in our opinion, forecloses dialogue. It's often mixed with accusations of affiliation with political positions or armed groups that fuel offline harm to civilians. You'll hear more about that actually in one of the report findings, but this is a very common dynamic in Sudan in particular, where civilian populations are accused of affiliation with an armed group. And then when the other side of the conflict arrives in the area, it results in harm to civilians because they feel like there's some kind of justification, or provides a justification, a narrative justification. So we'll be talking more about that in particular. These three categories aren't exclusive to Sudan. This is something that we see elsewhere as well. So we just wanted to give the broad framing before Hussam goes into what's happening specifically. And then the last thing, just for context, is that I said we do a lot of, we're going to be talking about social media analysis, social media listening. If you're interested in the technical details, we've created a tool. It's called Phoenix. It's both open source and there's a hosted version that is free to use if you are a peace builder, mediator, or adjacent. And it's designed specifically to help peace builders and mediators understand these issues around information warfare. And it works in lots of languages, platforms, and contexts. And if anybody is interested, I can share. I think Megan will share a link in the chat for those online, and I'm happy to speak with any of you later about it. So that's our broad frame. And with that, I will hand over to Hussam.
Thanks, Elena, and thank you all for being here. So over the past year, Build-Up has convened a group of Sudanese civil society data researchers to monitor how the war is being talked about on social media, and we try to reflect that in our monthly report. That on this report we track the narratives and how they spill into offline events. But today we are going to focus on 5 thematic reports. 4 of them have been produced by 4 of those researchers with 4 different topics. There is a thread running through all 5 reports, including the one that been produced by Build-Up, which is also I'm going to cover also in this coming minutes. So the thread that links all of this report is quite simple, is that in Sudan, the information space is not a side show to the war. It's one of the places the war is being fought. So let's go to the first report. Thanks. The first report that we are going to look at is by Musa Idrisa Amir. It's about the divisive separatist narratives, and he's focusing on the River and the Sea organizing. And for it's a quick brief and for background, the River and the Sea is a group that's being formed online in late 2020 and the early of 2021. And it's simply a group that thinks that the Arab are superior in Sudan and therefore should be the voice shouldn't be part of Sudan, and those who comes from Darfur are the devils himself in different language. So Musa is trying to understand how these narratives are evolving in social media, and in fact, given that this group is being formed in the online space from the beginning, that make this research very significant. So the main findings that Musa is seeing right now, and the key findings that he's seeing that at the core, the language is built to exclude. So this group is trying to build a lexicon, and this lexicon is built on the exclusion of others, and to be more besides, they are focusing on that the non-Arab ethnicities should be excluded from Sudan. And also he was looking into the method. So this group is trying to do the re-innovating of terms, like you take the words that people use to describe cultural group, use recirculate them in a ways that normalize violence through sheer repetition, and new racist vocabulary gets manufactured. Over time, خلاص, it starts to sound ordinary. I can give some examples for this. As example, usually in Sudan, there is a word to call the non-Arab as slaves, and the Arabic word is abd. And I have to highlight this. I might use some harsh words to explain what's really happening, so I'm really sorry for doing so. But afterwards, this group um, discovered that they can't use this word because Facebook X is gonna just shut down their accounts. So they came with new phrases like, rather than telling someone that he's a slave, you are going to use this word, the wonderful ones, or الرائعين, rather than just he's a slave. So you are trying to create a new vocabulary, and this new vocabulary is being used in a racist form, and the social media platform can't ban this account because, in fact, if you tell someone that you are wonderful, how you can just argue that this is a racist word when it comes to Sudan. And also he highlighted that these narratives and the hate speech is getting shielded by behind the coded language, as I highlighted, and it's amplified through platforms and echo chambers that keep reproducing it. And I think the lens here for that this research is looking with is that the language engineering, the weaponizing vocabulary through that exclusion and the violence that follows comes to feel normal and even justified. And I think in a coming also one of the researchers, we can see a very specific case for that. So let's go to the next one. It's about Tuhfa. It's by Tuhfa. It's about the digital expression as a response for collective to collective trauma by Tuhfa al-Kamil. And this report is focusing he's looking at the physiology of words, خلاص. So Tuhfa is trying to understand how Sudanese people try to express anger through language online. So first of all, that one of the key findings that Tuhfa found, and that surprised us, that we assume that anger would mostly show up as a direct cause for violence. In fact, it didn't. What the research found instead was the most of the content takes the form of identity-based exclusion as a response to anger. So because of the atrocities, the anger is real, but it travels through the identity, not through explicit threats at most times. Also, Tuhfa realized that there is also a timeline. So the collective grief, as example, when it comes to the big massacres, like what happened in Al-Fashir, like what happened in the Nura, like what happened in different places of Sudan, you will see that the collective grief use simplistic expression. And these expressions, when usually it's a religious expression, it always spikes in the days immediately after an atrocity. And then sometime later comes a second wave, symbolic reframing, and a kind of reimagining of reality. As example, when an atrocity happened in Nura, people are trying to reimagine the reality differently in social media. So they will try to reflect their anger by saying that this should happen in this form of things. And sometimes, usually they use this form of language just to exclude all those others because they feel anger, they want to take revenge, they want to just exclude those who caused the atrocity or the massacre and so on. So the lens that Tuhfa used is the trauma is a fool for the conflict, and the identity power um, is controlling the information war as much as any deliberate propaganda that's being used. And these things they moved on a predictable rhyme, and I think, yeah, according to Tuhfa, which matters if you want to anticipate them. Yani, if you want to anticipate what's really happening, you can see the rhyme of how these things travels through language. Okay, can we go to the next one? Yeah, this one is about the rebranding of the RSF, and it's by Ithar Ahmed, one of the panelists today. So this report is focusing on the RSF attempts to rebrand itself. So for those who don't know, the RSF is a militia that being formed. It was the Janjaweed, and then it was taking different forms, and it ended by being the Rapid Support Forces in 2017, when the government of al-Bashir, when the Bashir regime just gave them this name at that time. And then after the war in February 2025, last year, they ended by forming a new alliance with some parts of Taqaddum at that time. So Taqaddum split it into two halves, Sumud, and then the others went to form an alliance with the RSF, and they named themselves Tasis. So what's Ithar is trying to understand how the RSF is trying to rebrand itself. So one of the main findings that she came with is that it's a careful point, I think, that we should start by looking at, but that people are using the new name Ta'sis in for all sorts of reasons, but that doesn't mean that they are endorsing it and they are just supporting that, because the rhetoric matters, how it formed, how we can look at when we look and when we read the data itself. And also when she looked into the platform, she noticed that as example on X, it turns out X to be the widest and the most accessible space for this content, more than Facebook. And I think that's because of the community rules here and there. And also, I think the most important insight that Ithar came, that the rebranding isn't only about your own names, it's also about how you rename your opponent. As example, the army is going to be renamed, and it's going to be called the militia of the Islamic movement, and Sudan itself as a whole country is going to be called the state of 56. So you can rewrite the whole vocabulary in conflict, and that's why words change its meaning rapidly. And also, Ithar reminds us that this is not new in Sudan. The struggle over language have happened before rapidly in different ages of Sudan history. And the lens that Ithar used here is the reputational laundering and how you control names of both yourself and the enemy as a bit to control who public sees as legitimate. The next one is about the digital incitement network in Niala. Yeah, and I'm trying to speed up. Okay, this one is focusing on a certain geographic place, which is Niala, which is in South Darfur. And the case is that how the SAF supporter are trying to justify what's happening there. So mainly, Niala right now is the capital of the what's so-called Ta'sis government. They are using Niala as a capital city for them, and in fact, they are using social media to justify the bombardment for the civilians over there. So in fact, they are using words like referring to the air jets by saying that it's the great kebab maker, and we all knows what does that mean. It means that the people who are going to be killed are being to be referred as the grilled kebab. So those civilians who are killed, they are simply dehumanized, and they will turn to a meal, and this meal is made by the great kebab maker, which is the air jets, and also this the SAF supporters are stripping people out of their humanity and dignity and trying to convert the bombing and the bombarding for the civilians into a joke, or what's so-called military achievement. Whole neighborhoods, whole communities are being targeted as social incubators for the RSF. That means that whatever happened to them is justified under this term. And in fact, the total of this is quite sad. Dozens of civilians have been killed or injured. And yeah, no one tried to reflect that, because the cost is quite real. And unfortunately, also because of the internet connectivity issues in the places that's being ruled by the RSF, many of these atrocities isn't reflected yet. And yeah, that's here we can see how the post that's being written in social media is reflected to airstrikes, reflected to justifying the violence. And we can see many examples for this, not only in Niala, in different places where the civilians are targeted by the both warring parties, and in this case by the Sudanese armed forces. The final report is the one that we at Build Up did in
Can you hear? I'm just letting you know that you don't need to speed up. You're doing great on time.
Okay.
So take time.
Guys, okay, I can take some time.
I'll get to the next slide now, but no need to speed up.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the fifth thematic report is the one that being produced by Build Up. Was written by me and my colleague Mahmoud Bastati. This report was produced, I think, in July 2024. Yet the findings that we have at that time still works these days, and that would show us how things are just staying the same in Sudan in a way or another. So the report name was the Sudan's digital battlefield. It's available on our website, and you can always get back to see the full report. But we were trying to understand how the two sides are using the same digital tools, are weaponizing the same digital tools, and they're weaponizing the digital sphere in Sudan. So first, we understand that both, first, as I say, they are weaponizing narratives. So the RSF and SAF alike normalize violence, justify crime, dehumanize communities, and polarize the public. And we have seen also that both warring parties are having their own war. They are waging the online space, so they are fighting over it. So SAF is trying to control Facebook. I think they succeeded on that. For some time, X were also a battlefield between the two of them, until the most prominent account that's affiliated with the RSF have been banned. Then that's when also have take control over X. But now I think TikTok is a quite interesting platform to look at, because I think RSF have a significant presence on TikTok. And then we looked into the narrative of the warring parties at that time, and it's remained the same. So the SAF is trying to call the war of dignity, and in fact, this is a name that's being formed. The first time that we heard about the dignity thing, it was around the framework political agreement when the Islamists marched against it, and they called this march the March of Dignity. And then when the war started, the army used that name as a name of this war. So also the SAF narrative is built on accusing the civilians of being the RSF backer, and also using the social incubators to justify the atrocities that's happening against the civilian in different places in Sudan. And as you see in the previous thematic reports that I have spoken, that I have reflected some of the key findings, we saw that happens quite clearly. So what about the other part, the RSF? So the RSF is claiming that they are fighting for democracy, and they are fighting against the state of 56. I have say when I spoke about ETHA's research, I reflected that they are trying to rename the whole country, the whole political regime of being the state of 56. It's not Sudan, it's not the government of Sudan, it's the state of 56, and this state is an unjust state. It's a state that goes against the marginalized people in Sudan, and they are the defenders of those people, and they are accusing the central and northern Sudan as obsessors who control the country, who have looted the resources of other places, and that the RSF is coming now to defend all of these marginalized communities, and they are just trying to take what's theirs back. And we ended also by having the Tassis Alliance, as Ethar mentioned in her research. So in that research, we focused into two incidents. The first one is the Wad Nura massacre, and also what happened in Cannabis. So Wad Nura massacre happened on the 5th of June 2020. Simply the RSF attacked the village of Wad Nura. They killed more than 100 civilians. 35 of them were kids. And then they came with this narrative that we didn't attack the civilians, we didn't kill the civilians, we actually attacked the Islamist militias who were hiding among the civilians. And they try to justify this violence by accusing the victims being responsible for their own death. And then they start to amplify this narrative and using their influence and the influencers account that's affiliated with the RSF, using their own platforms for a quiet time. And then what happened at that time is that the SAP supporters uses this incidents like what happened in Wad Nura and what happened in Eastern Jazeera in general to weaponize the communities against other communities. So they start calling some communities of being cooperators with the RSF. And in fact, they accused Al-Kanabi communities of being so. So when the army regained control over Jazeera in December 2024, we have seen these narratives that's been circulated for 6 months. We have seen them becoming the reality. So in fact, after the army regained control of Jazeera, the same narratives that's being seeded in the social media for the past 6 months just show itself in a different way. So we have seen many videos for SAF soldiers or the militias that's affiliated with SAF, like Al-Bara, thematic, and others. They are slaughtering civilians. They are throwing people from the bridge. And then we also saw what happened in Kanabi communities when it was targeted by Abu Agla Keikal militia, Sudan Shield, which ironically, Abu Agla was a fighter with the RSF, and then he changed his position, and then he came back to Al Jazeera, the city that he helped the RSF to gain control over. So he came back with SAF to help them to take the city again. So he was the hero of the warring parties in the both cases, and he came back with SAF, and he committed crimes against Al-Kanabi communities. That was filmed, that was shown, it was all over the social media. And then this violence goes beyond Sudan's border, because in fact some of those who were killed at that day were from South Sudan. So the South Sudanese were angered, and then a lot of riots started, and it ended by killing some Sudanese in South Sudan. And we have seen how this violence traveled through social media and also through borders. In these cases, we have seen 7 divisive tactics. The first one is collective blame, so you will blame the whole community about without differentiation between them. And we have seen that the identity-based attacks, we have seen this being used by the RSF, we have seen this used by SAF also. You will frame others as an extensional threat to you. Then if the incident happened, if the atrocity happened, you will ask your influencers to mitigate this, the impact of this atrocity by saying that let's undermine the incident itself. And if you find yourself cornered, you will use the whataboutism as example. When the RSF killed the civilian with the NURA, some of the account that's affiliated with the RSF start saying that, why are you talking about what happened with the NURA? What about those who have been bombarded in Darfur? It's about what about those, not what about what we did. It's about what others did. And then you will shift the blame to the victims, as we saw in with the NURA. You will always say that those weren't civilians; they were just soldiers hiding within this. Even with the fact that you have killed 35 kids, alas, you will always try to say that no, those children aren't civilian. They were fighting with the army, and in a way, and then you would displace responsibility. As example, when the RSF have committed these crimes, some of the journalists, like what Uthman Mirghani and the others wrote in social media, he blamed Taqaddum for that atrocity, and Taqaddum was from just 6 days before, and others were just trying to refer to the RSF by saying it's Khalid Silik militia, which is Khalid Umar Yusuf. He's a prominent opposition leader in Sudan, and so on. So they were trying to shift the blame from those who committed the crime to others. Yeah, in a way or another. So those are the five thematic reports that I wanted to highlight the key findings of. But I want to highlight again that as Elena mentioned, these findings aren't final yet. For the 4 thematic reports, ours is published already. It's on our website. You can always go back and read it, and also you can look at our monthlies, the monthly that we have been producing over the past year. But it shows us that there is a link, there is a bond between what's happening online, what's happening offline, and these things are reflecting, and it's been circulated in different forms. But in fact, when it comes to the lens of information warfare, we can see that what's happening right now in Sudan is really, really bad, and we need to understand the information sphere very well, so we can combat with the harms that's been created by the warring parties, by those who are interested in creating fear and death and investing in war in Sudan. So yeah, thanks. I think over to you, Aurelia.
Thank you, Sam, so much. I'm always, obviously I follow all of this work that you're doing. Don't go off camera yet. I'm about to say nice things about you. I always follow all this work that you're doing, and I'm always so impressed when I hear you tell it back, the depth of detail that you express, but also that is expressed by the other authors who weren't able to join us to present, but this is very much based on their work. I think one of the things that strikes me is just having the detail of a lot of this is, so it's not just hate speech and calls to violence, it's actually a lot more complex, and we can only really work to respond to it if we understand that detail. The use of terms to position yourself, and of terms that are maybe not easily understood on the first round. And also, I think it was coming through as another thread, or at least because I'm used to thinking about this a lot, Hassan, this whole thing about, you have official accounts, you have affiliated accounts, but then you also have influencers and proxies, and, it's very complicated. And when we speak with the political actors, right, Hassan, there's a little bit of we're not actually in control of all this. It's sort of, it's not a controllable space politically. And I think that's also kind of coming through in this level of detail. So thank you so much for taking us through all of that. And now, Ifad, you are finalizing one of the reports. We heard Hassan's summary of that. And absolutely, if you want to say more about that report, we'd love to hear it. But I think we also just want to hear your reflections about all of the trends or the threads that Hussam was pulling through. What is your view on everything that's coming through this research as somebody who's watching this space as well?
Hi. So there is a pattern that I've seen. There is a reason, a place where everything starts. There is specific vulnerabilities that got us to this position that helped this happen. And the first one would be the speed versus truth. Whenever you look at any trend, any situation, you would find that the speed by which rumors can move is faster than anything else. It's faster than verification, fact-checking, it's faster than truth. So if you've seen something being shared and you're not even sure if it's true or not, your first reflection or your first attitude would be to actually share it and ask about it. That's what happens in the Sudanese social media. As a result for that, you will find that it's easy for rumors to spread, it's easy for misinformation, disinformation to spread without the fact-checking being able to keep up or level up. Fact-checking is left behind. And in extreme cases, when an information is fact-checked, some people tend to believe in it more. That's a more reason for them to, why did you need to fact check it? Why did we need to talk about it? If they are talking about it, if there is reports about it, then this is important. It helps with more spread. So the speed versus truth is a real weakness that we have in our platforms, in our community. And when I say this is a weakness, it's not just online, it's a real life situation. There is a hyper conflict of sorts, like Hussam was describing. What you see in social media, you see in reality, it transforms into action. But it's not simply political or war militarized action. It's not just the South, the RSF, and all political parties. Some people are in it for the money. You will find a lot of clickbaiters where their main position here is benefiting from this situation. Beam reports have a report about several pages that's been run from Indonesia, and all of those pages have the same pattern. They pick specific content that incites hate speech, that's very problematic, but it gets a lot of views, it gets a lot of clicks. And when you pay more attention, you found that those pages are monetizing the content they are sharing. So for them, it's just about the money. And when you understand the background where they are coming from, the countries this is being run from, it raises the question if this is even someone related to the conflict, if this is someone, this is situation impacts them directly. This is definitely someone who understands the language, but is it a Sudanese person or not? There is questions that you can't answer. And it's very clear that one of the vulnerabilities in this situation that it does bring money. People are anxious for information, for data. And as we've seen, we don't have a lot of that in Sudan. That's why social media has become one of the main platforms for information. Information is being shielded. They are playing around with data, whether it's the SAF or RSF, or even the political leaders and community representatives. That hunger for information has led to a market, a place where clickbaiters are using this market to benefit, to get their aim gain. And that's another weakness that we're suffering because. And then Hussam talked about global reach. What you write in social media goes beyond borders. The example he shared where an issue in Sudan has resulted to something happening in South Sudan. People are killed, a massacre started in Sudan and somehow it ended in another country, cross borders. And some other problems can start across borders. You'll find a lot of data and information is being shared by influencers who are not Sudanese, who are not fully part of the context, but they are sharing the data and the information they have. Some of them are authentic, sharing their opinion, their mind, trying to report. Others are bad, some are just bots. So it's a global issue right now. It's not just the Sudanese social media or our own community influencers. It went beyond border. It has a global reach. Now it's an issue that doesn't just touch us, because if I'm talking about my own research, we talked about RSF rebranding. RSF started at Janjaweed, and the year they called themselves RSF, they were one of the benefitors from a European Union fund for better migration controls and border controls. They received training. They were called border protection units, and that's maybe probably the reason why they still have weapons from different countries that's not supposed to be dealing in weapons with RSF. And there is many reports about that. When you look at that, it happened because one day they changed their name, they shifted. They were no longer the militia of Janjaweed, the militias that everyone knows them as devils on horsebacks. No, now they are the RSF, Rapid Support Force, a more fancy name that allowed international community to actually see them in a different lens and give them legitimacy. And once that legitimacy of RSF ended, now there is another legitimacy for them as Ta'sis Alliance, Ta'sis Forces, whatever the name they chose. And that's for global reach. That's not simply to just wash the image within the Sudanese. It's for them to have legitimacy beyond borders, to have a global reach. It's easier for international entities to deal with a new name that does not have a record versus a name that have a very dirty record. They are aware of that, they are using it. And that's a pattern you will see even politicians doing this for themselves. So the global reach part goes from several sides. It can be used, utilized, and we will see that in different patterns. We will see international media outlets playing a role in that. And that would lead me to that whatever happens in social media goes beyond the platforms. So this is why we're studying this and we're talking about the patterns that's happening in social media. It's not just because it became one of the main sources of information in the Sudan war. It's also because it has impact and effect beyond that. We said global reach, and we said, I said the channels are using this, TV channels, media outlets. You will find that in instant when RSF has been reporting that they have token control over a specific city, between an RSF soldier sharing this information, this claim, on their own personal Facebook or TikTok account, and for a news channels like Al Arabiya or Al Jazeera to report it, the time gap is not that long. For some posts, it would be less than 30 minutes between the RSF claim on social media and the news outlet sharing. So media outlets are like giving the information and the things that are being shared in social media more exposure. They are doing it in a way it's this person claims, some RSF soldiers claim, some South soldiers claim. And I think the biggest one of them that was very obvious and it was very disturbing when the Iran war started. Someone shared jokingly that the Iranian leader, Khamenei, the late Iranian leader Ali Khamenei, is hiding in Sudan. He made it safe to Port Sudan and he's here now. And for Sudanese context, for many that was very clearly a joke, but many others were sharing it. You will find Israeli influencers, Emirati influencers, some reporters resharing the information. Some are just using it as a fact, responding to it as a fact, others are raising a question, and some media outlets echoed that. And now we live in a time where many media outlets have programs designed to echo what's happening on social media. We talk about it, they raise question. They don't necessarily say it's a fact, but you definitely give it more visibility. And that has went beyond social media users. Someone has said before, how many social media users we have in Sudan? Are they reflected of the real Sudanese society? Is that a representative sample? And while all of these are valid questions, and there is a data gap between what we know from social media platforms themselves and what they report, and what can happen, because I can join social media and put another country other than Sudan, and there is no way for you to confirm. There is no data confirming whether I'm a Sudanese social media influencer or not. So the data gap is real. But even with that data gap, even with if we said we have only 2 social media users, if media outlets are echoing this content, then the reach goes beyond those on the platform. Whatever you find in the platform goes beyond the platform. So it's sort of a cycle from the Sudanese social media to regional news, wider spread, and this is a continuous cycle. It's a repetitive one. This keeps happening over and over, and that's what put us in credibility risk, because if a major news outlet is sharing the information, that raises a lot of question. If a channel like Al Jazeera, for example, started sharing about Ta'sis, they started by saying the so-called Ta'sis Alliance, the so-called Ta'sis government, as we did not name them, they named themselves. And after a while, the phrase of so-called is not mentioned anymore. And you just say Ta'sis government, Ta'sis Alliance. That gives them legitimacy. That will spread the information beyond those who have direct reach to it. So what happens in social media goes beyond, it causes credibility risk. And you can find it even in search engines. If you search Google, it's easy to find information that's over there in a social media platform, even if you're not part of that social media platform. So it's not a matter of who uses the platform, gets the data. This data is online, that data will spread, and it will continue to cause an issue. So from my point of view, this is a pattern happening. All the researches that we have done would be very specific to specific situation or focusing in a specific place, like hate incitement in Niyala, exactly dehumanizing, and the direct link between what's shared in social media and actual attacks. But that happens even beyond Niyala, happens in other regions. It happens cross borders. I will share an example that's not war related, but in the Nile Basin region, in the flooding season, there is a lot of social media users talking about floods, how it's impacting them, the damage that's happening. And that conversation can easily turn, which happened more than once, can change from just a conversation about the impact of flood on people's life into an actual political conversation, and let's say some sort of an online fight between 2 different countries. It happened between Ethiopia and Egypt. It happened between Sudan and Ethiopians. It just would be 2 different countries, 2 different users from 2 different countries having a conversation that goes beyond what it started with. It started with they're all having problems with floods, we're all getting impacted by them, ended by an actual political information that we need to change that this country is harming us. It goes beyond what would you expect as regular. This is why social media monitoring needs more attention, needs more work. And this is not a space you can control, that's a reality. Many players are part of this. Many are using it, weaponizing it in a way to drive their own narrative. But this is a dynamic situation where you can't 100% drive your own narrative. You cannot control the entire opinion. You will find people fighting back. You will find other opinions. SAF is doing some social media work while RSF are doing other social media work. You will see it very clearly that there is coordinated content, there is specific propaganda that's being spread. You will find a lot of bots. There is 3 reports that I read about bots. I think they got over 129 bots in a very short period of time. And you can link some of them. Some of them would have clear link to SAF, RSF, very specific to situations. But that is, none of them controls the social media. None of them is leading the conversation. None of them is controlling the narrative. Reality states that all of them are playing, but this is a dynamic situation where none of them can actually lead the conversation. So having people in the middle monitoring, stating facts, and playing a role does matter. And this is the main take from all of the researches that we worked on. There is efforts to control, but that can never happen. And as long as people are reporting, people are monitoring, there is a way to play around this. There is never a way to control. We will never be able to stop such a thing, but we can definitely highlight it and we can definitely keep talking about it like we have been doing in these reports.
Asad, thank you so much for those additional reflections and just for sharing more as well about your own research. I think there's a couple of things that you pulled out the issue of conflict entrepreneurs at the beginning, or clickbaiters, and I'm really glad you did that, because I think that's a really important element of what we're seeing as well. I know you mentioned some coming from Indonesia. We've also seen some from the UAE, or linked to the UAE as well. Mark Owen Jones did that big report about it. So I think that's definitely something to also watch. And I also really liked the way that you talked about the rebranding, how that results in global reach, how it jumps into other media. One of the things we've been thinking about, which isn't in any of these reports, is how that also influences the way that we interact with AI agents. So essentially, if we're talking about pushing some rebranding into social media and into other media, it eventually influences the way that ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini will respond to questions about Sudan. Which I think is also something to watch out. So thanks so much for bringing in those additional points. And I just have one more thing to say, which actually dovetails very well from your last point, which is around, that's not the right thing to share. Let's not do that. Okay. So we're having a technical issue. I don't know why it's doing that. Hang on. There we go. Give me a second, because we're having a technical issue over here. Apologies to those of you in the room who are just getting to see my screen. There we go. Okay. Still doesn't want me to do it. Okay, we're trying one more time. Should work this time now. There we go. So I just have one last point to share, which dovetails with what you were saying at the end, Asad, because it's about what we can do. And so at Build Up, we are doing a number of things that respond to the analysis that we're seeing in these monitoring reports. This is by no means the only thing that you can do, but we wanted to end on this, even though I'm not going to go into great depth, because I don't want people to leave feeling like this is an unmanageable aspect of what is happening in Sudan. One of the things that we're doing, which in some ways you've seen through this presentation of the research findings, is to continue to do social media analysis, but critically to do it in a very participatory way. And we think that the participation in social media listening in a way works as a confidence building measure. So the reason that we've worked with groups of Sudanese researchers, including some of the ones who have written these thematic reports, but also others for our monthly monitoring, is that we really think that lays the ground for some alliance between different civil society actors around how to deal with the digital space. The second thing that we're doing has a lot to do with this whole thing of, there's all of these different actors, some of whom are not motivated by political reasons or military reasons. They're motivated by profit or by wanting to be an influencer. And so we're working with influencers who are engaged in harmful narratives to try to land counter-narratives inside the communities most at risk of mobilization. So this isn't working with peace activists or pro-democracy activists. This is working with the people who are actually engaged in some of the harmful narratives we're seeing online, to try and see if there's a few things that they can say that will reach their audience, which is the audience that actually needs to be influenced. Most of the time when you work on peace campaigns on social media, if you work with peace activists, you're basically preaching to the choir. So that's the second thing that we're doing. And then the last thing that we're doing is that we're working or trying to work to build some shared interest in a code of conduct for how to show up in social media. And so this is a set of minimum standards for political and armed actors operating in Sudan's information space. This is not to say you should be respecting all rights. This is actually to reframe this and say, we understand that propaganda is a weapon of war. We understand that you are using social media as part of your tactics, essentially. That with the use of any weapon, there should be some basic principles that we all agree to on how not to use it. And so if social media is a weapon in this war, then can we agree what are some minimum standards on how to do that. So we're convening both a set of civil society actors to try and define those specifically. So these are things like, for example, don't accuse a civilian population of affiliation. It's very specific things, not general calls, but specific commitments. And then we're also beginning some conversations with a series of political actors to test whether this is politically viable. So these are some things we're doing. We know other people are doing other things, but it's also just to end on a hopeful note that it is the fact that we're exploring everything that has happened doesn't mean that nothing can be done. And so that is the end of our presentation. We are sharing our email addresses in case you want to specifically ask any of us any questions. These will also be in the chat. Obviously, people in this room, feel free to talk to me afterwards. I'm now going to turn it over to all of you for questions, but also for reflections. So why don't we do that? I'm going to stop sharing the screen and ask everybody, so Ithar, Hussam, and Megan, if you don't mind coming back on camera. I'll do this. There we go. So hopefully, there we go. And Hussam and yeah, Megan's there. I'm sure Hussam will come back in a second as well. So yeah, any questions or reflections? We've got one in the room, so I'm going to start with that, Megan, and then I'm going to hand to you for some of the ones online. Yeah, please.
I'm Natalia from Safer World, and thanks so much for that excellent presentation. And I really agree with you that the granularity of it really helps rather than more sort of generic framings. Yeah, I get what you're saying, that it's a very informal, to some extent, and uncontrollable environment, but it also makes me wonder to what extent is there a strategy around it? Obviously, it's a part of the military strategy to some extent, but is there a sense that they have a communication strategy that even takes into account complexity, like, for example, unequal access to internet across Sudan and diaspora networks and so on? Is there a sense of there being a strategy and how sophisticated it is? And then have they also been using, if you look at weapons flows, you would trace back to the source to try and demand some form of accountability, especially from those based outside of Sudan who are profiting from this. Is there any sense of those connections as well? I remember during the days of the Bashir regime, how they employed, it was either English or American PR company. Are there similar sorts of things happening? And then, sorry, one last thing. I really appreciate that for the researchers and for all of you. There must be some element of trauma when you're going through these horrific social media posts. So I just want to acknowledge that, and also ask if you also stumbled upon the sort of counter side, the spaces of hope, like especially during the beginning of the war, there was a real sense of social media also being a space for good, like how it was used for crowdsourcing information that really played a role in facilitating mutual aid networks and so on. Have you seen similar spaces of hope emerging as well?
Thank you. So maybe Hussam, can I pass this to you first, and then if you want to add as well. So first, the question around, do we have a sense that the armed actors particularly actually have a communication strategy that matches some of what we're seeing in this? And does that include hiring people to do this? And do we have a sense of where that might come from? I have something to say about the hiring, but I can come in later. And then have you come across spaces for hope in social media as well?
Thanks, Elena. We have seen this, especially in our monthly reports, because as you see, these thematic reports are focusing on different on a very specific topic. So we are going to examine a lot of things when it comes. But in our monthly report, because we are following what's happening in social media in monthly basis, we have seen this different times, especially when it comes to the major incidents, like the big massacres, like what happened in Al-Fashir in October past year, and what happened maybe in Dain this year when the army bombarded a hospital, killed tens of kids just for, and then that was justified and so on. What happened also in Al-Fashir. We have seen that many accounts have been backed, have been mobilized, even though it's not Sudanese. They were just pushing these accounts to pushing some sort of narratives around the incidents that's been happening, and they're trying to justify what's happening on the offline spaces. So it's not only posts, it's actually bullets that's being pointed to the Sudanese chest, and they are killed because of that. And they are trying to push the social media space to be a space for justifying the killing and what they call the other one, or the enemy, or the one who is coming from I don't know where. So in fact, they are trying to do this to mobilize, to use the social media just to flood it with a lot of things, just to to reflect different things. So yeah, this is about the first one. I don't know if I wants to add something about this, and then we can go to the second one, or should I take them both? Faith, if you want to add something.
Ethar, you want to come in on this point?
Let me just add, for us, sometimes it's simple to find the connection or the communication strategy, because it shows you'll find that they are sharing the same content, sometimes word to word. They are sharing the exact opinion, sometimes word to word, in the same timeline. 20 accounts sharing the same post with 1 to 2 minutes apart from the sharing time. So that's clearly you are communicating. You have a communication strategy. You have been ordered to share this. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for 20 people to share the same thing at the same moment. And then Hussam said al-Fashir, they turned the name of al-Fashir massacre into freeing al-Fashir, Tahrir al-Fashir. People were being murdered door to door. I lost some friends. My friends lost family members. We were just in the middle of this, seeing it live happen, and we can see the name change, the name shift. This are not the community members are choosing to name this as a freeing al-Fashir. For them, it's a massacre. So the change of name, the hashtag, the speed by which the hashtag is being shared, the time it's happened, it clears there is a communication strategy there, and this is how we catch it. This is technically how we see it.
Okay, I'm gonna go for the second one. I'm gonna use what Ethar just said. When it comes to hope, I have to talk about the civilians' narratives in social media first. I want to do a quick brief about that. So unfortunately, I think Ethar just mentioned 20 accounts posting the same thing at the same moment. It's a way of the armed forces in Sudan to amplify their narratives. And because, unfortunately, I'm gonna say this, the civilians lack the ability to mobilize. So they decided that they're going to copy this technique and they're going to use it in their campaigns. So you will see that tens of accounts are going to amplify the same post with the same picture at the same moment. And that would end it by having a counter narrative that will just demolish that attempt from the civilians to change the narratives from war to a very peaceful one. Yet, since the start of this year, we have seen in our monthly report, we have seen that the civilians start to learn from their mistakes, and they start to mobilize differently after three years before. And I think the spike of that was on the 15th of April this year, on the third year of war. So the civilians, I think they start to mobilize in different networks. They're trying to change the tactics. They're trying to, I think they ended by agreeing that we shouldn't follow the same patterns in posting things. We can agree on the strategy, and then everyone can do whatever he could. So as example, the political parties are going to produce a different content from the youth organizations and so on. And I think this have reflected in a different way on social media, because that created a new form of discord between the Sudanese. It's become about it. Do we have to keep on fighting rather than talking? Do we need to change our way and look into social media? Unfortunately, I won't say that lasted for long, because for the past 2 months, we have seen that after they reached the spike, they went down again, and the ruling parties start to recontrol the digital platforms. I think that unfortunately one of the main reasons that the hope narratives or the peaceful narratives or solidarity narratives being demolished is because there is a problem within the imagination, the language that the civilians are using. So sometimes they're trying to change the narrative, they are trying to push it away, but in fact they found themselves failing that, because in fact they are using the words of the ruling parties in combating with them. So
Yeah,
Thank
so let
Oh,
me
yeah.
build on that. Yeah, because I think one of the biggest spaces to have hope in is the women-only spaces in social media. There is many groups and let's say closed communities in a way for women only, and that place is one of the best places I find hope in, because there is actual conversations happening there. There is people who disagree but still have a conversation. There is people who clearly pro RSF or just against war in general, who have a conversation in such groups, women only groups. So this is one of the many spaces that I find hope in. But as Bassam said, in the general space, because Sudanese people tend to use the same language they are being attacked with, the results are not getting us anywhere. We're still stuck somehow in the same cycle. But definitely, there is a little bit of hope. If I see it in women groups, maybe that's because this is one of the spaces that I'm generally in. I think we can see it elsewhere with time.
Thanks, Athar and Hassam. And I just want to repeat your point around the trauma connected with this kind of work. Perhaps not to ask Hassam or Athar to comment on that specifically, but I can say that that is something that we see a lot with social media researchers in Sudan and elsewhere. Something to pay attention to. We certainly pay attention to it internally at Build Up. So, maybe we can take a question from the online participants, Megan.
Perfect. Maybe I can share a couple, because there are some that are connected, I think. So I think this is primarily for you, Hussam Etar. One of the questions is around whether you can elaborate a little bit more on the impact and attributes of different social media platforms, for instance, Meta versus TikTok, to provide a better understanding of that context. And the kind of digital competition between them. And the question kind of notes that different platforms have different audiences. There are different characteristics of those platforms. They might be popular in different geographies. And that might help provide some context. Linked to that, there was another question, which kind of also looks at the information ecosystem around considering the actual kind of connectivity. So someone shared some data report or statistics, just highlighting that there's nearly 80 million cellular connections, nearly 50 million internet users. Do these things get integrated into your analysis? How does that kind of impact what you're seeing in the audience behavior and the impact of those different platforms?
I can go first. I think this had been asked by Tharwat. So, in fact, I don't think it's about the competition. It's about how we do understand how these platforms work differently from each other, and why the community rules within these platforms is quite different one to another. So if we start by Facebook designated the RSF as a threat for the community. I think when the war started, because we have seen the atrocities, and then they will just follow quite through. It's been, I think it was implemented in different contexts, so it wasn't hard for Facebook to just change that and just target the RSF accounts and so on. Plus also, I think the monitoring in Facebook is quite different from X and TikTok, and we should look into that. So it's not about the also the way that the staff is trying to because at the start of the war, the RSF was trying to use social media as their way to show their victory over the army. So they were sharing graphic content, they were sharing a lot of things that connected to the sexual harassment to women, and also the raping and things. So and I think in our Sudan digital battlefield report, those accounts were taken down afterward. But in fact, at that time, when we have taken those screenshots that you can see in the report, you will see that they were trying to talk explicitly about bad things, like the women in Shendi should be ready for them to be married, as example. It's like we are coming to Northern Sudan, we are going to occupy these places, and we are going to rape and take this woman for us, as example. So Facebook have taken they acted against this sort of content at that time. When it comes to X, it's not the same case, because we know X, especially now, they don't care about these things. They don't have these rules. You can't even reach out to X to say, by the way, guys, you should do this to monitor this. They don't care about that. In fact, I don't think it's only in Sudan. I think we have seen this in different contexts. I think also Milena might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the polarization footprint that we have done in Kenya, we have seen that X is quite polarized when it comes to the polarization footprint in Kenya and in different contexts. So in fact, you can just sit out to X and say, yeah, by the way, this context is quite harmful. They don't care. And in fact, sometimes Grok will help you to create this content. I think this is it's not that related to what Elaf asked in the chat. We might go to that after a few seconds, but in fact, it's not that easy to work with X. That's why the RSF used X as a channel for their to spill their narratives over X for quite time. And then when it comes to TikTok, I think TikTok are trying to act right now. They are trying to change the way that the platform is being used in Sudan, but they have to highlight this. When the atrocities happen in Al-Fashir, we have anyone who have been working in Sudan or is interested in reading the news, he will hear. I think the name of Abu Lulu have come across you. He's the one who was in a video. He talked about he killed 2,000 Sudanese, and then he forgot to count, so he started again from the start. Because someone asked him, "How many have you killed by yourself?" He said, I think 2,000, but you know what? I have forgotten. I'm going to start again. So, and then he became the sample of the atrocity, the one who have done all of these crimes. I would love to say that this clip was part of a live on TikTok. It was a live on TikTok. He was showing his ability of killing publicly, and the platform never blocked that platform from being broadcasting. He was talking about his atrocities publicly while he was lying on his side, and no one questioned that. It's not only about Abululu, just for the record. I'm just saying that because in fact, TikTok have amplified many things, and because that we can't always monitor the graphic itself, we will monitor the text. I would believe that what we have been seeing in these videos can go much way worse than the things that we have seen so far. That's why I think it's really important to see how we can work with TikTok in changing things, how we can reach to a common or a minimum standards of how we can define the role of these tech companies when it comes to the Sudanese context. I think also there's a problem with the annotation within these companies itself. So it's really hard for them to annotate this enormous number of data because in fact, they lack the Sudanese who are working within this context. And when it comes to the local language, we have tried to do this before, and I think we have many debates because most of us are coming from different places, so the word is going to shift its meaning from a context to a context, from a community to community also. And in conflict situation, always the words are gonna shift its meaning rapidly. I think one last thing is about the number of users of the internet. Yeah, it's a really important thing to understand how many are using the internet in Sudan, but we have to understand that there's a problem of the network connectivity. I think the data portal never put that into account, because in fact there is a lot of geographic areas in Sudan they don't have an internet. They used to have an internet a while ago, but right now they are not using the SIM cards. They are using Starlink. They are using different ways to reach out to the internet. So we have to understand this also when it comes, and we have also to understand that the diaspora is affecting the information warfare much more than those who are living inside Sudan itself. And we can see this in many occasions. If we just follow the accounts, if we just went to see where these people are located, we will find out that many of them are living just outside of Sudan. They are not paying the price of their post. They don't have this. They don't have to pay for the consequences of the post that they have been publishing online. So yeah, they will keep on doing this. I don't think this is something that's happening only in Sudan. It's happening, I think, everywhere where the diaspora have the ability to shape the information warfare. I hope that I've answered all of the questions.
You answered lots of the questions. Thanks, Hussam, and thank you also for pulling out how this isn't just about Sudan, right? Like this is something that we see elsewhere. So when Hussam was referencing the study we did in Kenya, one of the things that was really interesting about that study is how we saw that there were different norms of polarization in different platforms. So on X, it's about the polarizing content itself, the language. On TikTok, it's about the fact that when that appears, nobody responds to stand up to it in the comments. And in YouTube, the main issue is you have completely fragmented universes of content, so people seeing completely different things. So I think this thing of like understanding the different aspects of polarization is really important. Did you have something else to add on those comments, or shall I take some more questions?
Just one point. The numbers you get from the data portal does not translate to actual users. If you have 17 million cellular user or connections, it does not mean 17 million users. One can have 3, 5. You have seen this in Sudan. So taking that into consideration is an important part. We definitely have to take the numbers, take an eye into the numbers, but we have to translate what does it mean. And we need to understand sometimes numbers doesn't mean what we think it means. In this case, it does not translate into numbers of users, and that number is tricky to find. It's just hard to calculate. So we don't have an exact number for that in Sudan or in other countries. It's a global issue. That's it.
Really good point. Thank you. Thanks, Afad, for pointing that out as well, so people don't get confused. Maybe I could take some more comments and questions. Yeah. Okay.
Michael, Queen's University. I'm interested in the methods behind the research on and really the extent to which you're using hybrid or really focused on the content analysis. I was wondering whether you have tried combining the offline research into the actors as a way of getting some of the explanation of why and how they do what they do. So this is really trying to drill into what the actors are thinking, what resources they're able to deploy, perhaps trying to tap into people who actually have an understanding of what the strategy is meant to be. I know this is cropped up in the first bit of the discussion, but it strikes me that sometimes you need sort of like different people and different methods from the social media analysis, but in terms of getting an overall description of it, it can be useful. I also understand that it's quite challenging. So if you have tried it, I'd be interested to know what challenges you found there. And sort of in the other end of the spectrum around methods, for the sort of the online content and actor analysis, To what extent has this been done all by human analysts, and to what extent have you sort of decided or had to deploy AI for collating and analysing the content? And I mean, I really want to know, have we reached the limit of the of the ability of human analysts to do this because of the sheer volume of material which is out there and how quickly it goes? I mean, from my experience of doing some of this on Afghanistan, I believe that to get to the kind of rich ideas that you've shared with us in all of the papers, I mean, obviously the human role is absolutely critical, and we cannot hand over to AI, and yet it also in Afghanistan we just grapple with you can't track it all with humans, even with quite a significant group of human analysts. It's just beyond our capability. And hence, I mean, I know that for the work I've done in Afghanistan, we've ended up concluding that you have to go hybrid. But I'm interested in your experience or grappling with those instances, two bits of the spectrum, extent to which you go, where you have a completely offline bit to get the background of the extent to which, or how you've integrated AI into your methods.
Thanks so much for that question. I think we're gonna take a few more, both from the room and from online, and then we can go through all of them just to give people a chance, and also to give you guys a break for a minute. Yes, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan from the FCDO. Just a quick one to say thanks for the amazing work you guys do. It's really great to be able to see it laid out in the depth that you guys do, and the kind of granular level of research and the insights that it's showing. I had a quick question on, it's quite a broad one, I guess, as well. To what extent do we understand the effectiveness of offline versus online interventions to prevent these narratives? Is there been, I assume there hasn't been a huge amount of research in this space, and is this a space that we need to really gain a bit more understanding? Because obviously how we then translate the amazing granular understanding that you guys produce into ways to actually prevent harm, I think, is then the most important part of the question. I know you guys are doing some great work in the online space, but what do we know about offline approaches to prevent that harm as well?
That's a great question. Thanks, thanks, Ryan. And maybe, Harriet.
Hi, thank you. That was so interesting, and thank you for all this work on this. I have quite a specific question around SAF narratives around civilians, because in one of your slides you talked about them being civilians being accused of being RSF backers, and we can understand sort of which piece of civilians, which group of civilians you're talking about there. But what about, how is SAF trying to draw legitimacy amongst different civilian sectors of the population? Thank you. Thanks, Harriet. Zand.
Quickly, thanks so much. Really, really interesting. I was wondering if this has come up at all in any of the peace talks or talks between the sides that happened at the time. I was just sort of thinking to myself about FARC, Colombian government talks. Once the propaganda they'd used against each other was a real problem about them having to try to talk to each other and convince their supporters that this was a good idea, call each other terrorists and that kind of stuff. So there's a bit of a sequencing element to that. And I wondered if that's come up at all, about if the sides were ever thinking about having a peace process, they'd have to sort of rehumanize in the digital space. So I was wondering if that had come up at all, or if any externals had said, this is something we want you to talk about, or if that is in that space at all.
Great. Asel, you have one too? Yeah. Okay, so one more, and then we're gonna do answers, and then we'll take questions from online. Megan, is that okay? Okay, yes, go for it.
Hi, Sam, Ita, thank you so much to all of you, to Gulabe. This is one of the most fascinating conversations I've really been part of, and the research, as everybody has said, is so rich and incredible. I'll try and be brief on my history and why I'm here and my question. I was the strategic advisor to the Minister of Health in the transitional government period of time in 2021. And before that, I worked as advocacy strategy referent in Médecins Sans Frontières. For a long time, I worked in the conflict and aid world, and now I'm kind of trying to find a different way of engaging. And it's very difficult for me after being in Sudan and working with the transition and then seeing the military coup happen and being diaspora and connecting so much with people for Sudan. And just knowing in the end, Sudanese people, we have so many talented and incredible people working in Sudan, like you, Hussam and Ithar, and all the people writing there. And so I've been in the diaspora looking for a way to contribute, to bring all of these different things together and be useful. So I'm working on leading this project called the Sudan Digital Archive, where we have been using browser tricks to record, which kind of does a recording online to create an archive, the digital assets from the time of the revolution, so that we can actually record and preserve them. And we've come across lots of different challenges when it comes to what you can and can't archive. And through this period, I've been doing a fellowship in political technology and trying to get more of a technologist understanding of what is happening. And I think, unfortunately, what you're describing is the same playbook that I think people in the UK and other places are seeing with fascist circles. And what I've observed more recently and more worryingly is that, the Gramscian sense of cultural production is upstream of politics. So what you're showing is that there is a culture that's being produced that makes all of these actions not only legible, but also they come to be seen as the correct action. And so X, is really a hive that we've seen promotes and creates a sort of algorithmic bias in favor of everything that you are talking about now. So I'm really concerned that we will come away from this conversation looking to reproduce older forms of conflict and stabilization strategies. With all due respect to my colleague from FCDO, I spent many years being a contractor on the conflict and stabilization unit. I worked very closely on the prevent strategy in 2009 on countering violent extremism in Yemen. We did lots of analysis, but we are in a totally different era now, where I think talking about preventing doing an intervention to prevent something is not sufficient. So I wanted to share that I'm here to support and to collaborate. First of all, I want to build new digital infrastructure, essentially. And that's what I'd like to offer to you. And I want to talk to you about what types of platforms exist that are having different conversations. So Ithar, you were talking about women's only spaces. And I thought that it was interesting the way that moderation happens there, because what I'm observing is there is a total breakdown of moderation, and there's almost an impunity for organizations like Meta and others. And when I'm in conversations in rooms with technologists, there are no humanitarian actors in the room with Anthropic. And Anthropic is almost like the Liberal Democrats during the hung parliament here. They get to make decisions about some of the new harms. And so I think the next wave that we need to be prepared for is lethal autonomous weapons, where AI agents are being used to fight. And I think they will start using these social media narratives and information to do tracking and targeting and information, which has already happened in Palestine and in Ukraine. So I think that we need to shift from defending ourselves and preventing, into actually creating a new kind of culture. How can we make that? Are you seeing in your research newer platforms emerging? In Europe, there is hope in Blue Sky and in other kind of platforms where you can put these messages. I'm so sorry for taking up so much space. I'm just very excited by what you're doing. Thank you.
No need to apologize at all. And Hussam and Ithar, both to give you a break, and also because some of these questions are relevant to outside of the work that we do in Sudan. Maybe I have a first go at some of these and then I pass it back to you. Yes, I'm getting a thumbs up. Okay, let's go. So just a couple of things in terms of the question about offline research to essentially understand the behaviors or the incentives behind some of these tactics. I think it's a really interesting question. It's not something that we're doing right now systematically. We have had some conversations with some influencers as part of our engagement with influencers to understand their incentives. But actually, it's something that we also think that would really complement the research. So thanks for bringing that up. And I'd love to hear more about how you did that in Afghanistan. In terms of the other way around, how we essentially leverage AI capabilities to automate some of the analysis, particularly some of the categorization of content. That is something that we already do. We do that in two ways. One is with a very simple system. So Phoenix incorporates the use of keyword-based classifiers. So it's essentially a lexicon that can be a living lexicon and then gets applied across the whole corpus of data. And it provides Hussam, Ifat, anybody using the platform with a quick way of getting a sense of where narratives sit, which then is so it's an aid to the analyst. I wouldn't say that is the analysis. In fact, at Build Up, we often talk about how you shouldn't think about human in the loop for AI. You should think about putting AI in the human loop, or in our case, AI in the peace building loop, not the other way around. And so that's very much the thinking behind that. We also specifically trained a more complex classifier. So we fine-tuned an existing AI model to apply to this data. And we've written an academic paper that actually explains how we did that. Because one of the most interesting things is that in order to fine-tune an AI classifier, an AI model, you need to annotate tons of data. And the annotation process is a peace-building process in itself, because you have to get everybody to agree what they're annotating into, iterative differences are really important for the way that they get trained. So if you want more background on that, we can share a paper on it. But it's definitely, I think, using AI to kind of, because otherwise it's impossible with the volume. I completely agree, but very much keeping it inside the peace building loop. On your point about the offline and online interventions and how those, how effective they are. I agree with you. I don't think there are very good systematic evaluations of that. We have in other places, we have some evaluations of how online interventions work. And I think a few things that emerge across what we've done, but also what others have done is, number one, that it's very difficult to get digital literacy to stick. That's perhaps not the best place. So people being aware that something is happening is not actually what helps have an impact. Changing, so moving up the chain and thinking about changing specific behaviors and what behaviors you can change is a much more effective way of having impact online. And so that's why, for example, we're interested in doing more research on the behavioral incentives for particularly high impact influencers, because we think that's where a lot of the actual impact would be. So there's a lot more in that, but just to say that's I think an area that needs more research. On this question about the peace talks, so that's it's quite interesting that you bring it up. Certainly in a lot of and Hussam, you can maybe add more on this one specifically, but certainly among a lot of the civilian actors, the political actors, the issue of online hate speech is very present. So in our conversations with political and civilian actors, if you say, we're doing some work on online hate speech, immediately they will say, this is a really important problem. This is something that is very much on our minds. Like it's something that, constantly comes up, certainly with Samud, but also with some of the other actors that we've been speaking with. And then in terms of sort of the mediation ecosystem, we know that the UN's personal envoy, Pekka Haavisto, has said that this is something also that he and his team are concerned about, this issue of online hate speech and the impact it's having. And I think there's a number of us in the sort of mediation space that are beginning to realize, and this is why we're working on this digital de-escalation thing, that it's going to be very difficult for, once there is any kind of peace process, for the parties to be able to come to the table in a constructive manner if we haven't at least de-escalated what's happening online a little bit. We're not saying stopping it. And in fact, when you speak with the political actors, right, Hussam, they will say, this isn't going to stop until the war stops. But if you can de-escalate it somewhat, then maybe it'll be easier to hold talks. It's essentially a confidence building measure in our view. So that's that one. And then on your last point, I feel like we could have an entire other webinar. I'm looking at the build-up people, because basically what you described is very much at the center of a lot of the work that we do, not just in Sudan. The way that we often think about it, you talked about the sort of Gramscian sense of culture and what it does and what it makes permissible. We think of it as essentially you're shifting the Overton window, right? That is what the far right is doing.
Yes.
That is also what is happening here. It's the same mechanism. And I think that for us, there's kind of three levers of change at the systemic level. So we're not talking about working with influencers or working on the specific digital de-escalation, but the systemic level. One is to try to transform the norms for how people show up in platforms. And that's why we care a lot about trying to work with influencers, and we've done a lot of work in other places. The second one is about alternative digital spaces. Now, I love the idea that maybe there'll be alternative social media platforms that we all migrate to, and blue sky will become the norm. Our experience is especially, it's really hard, and especially in a place like in Sudan. Actually, maybe what you can do is catch people where they are and move them into a different space. And we are actually doing that with something called Mersal, which Hussam, I'm going to put you on can you talk about Mersal when you come on mic? Is that okay? So I don't do it. Okay, so Mersal is our response to that. It's like, okay, if we know that people are having these very polarizing conversations on social media, can we create a different, more consultative space? And he'll tell you what that is in a second. And then this last point around, what else is coming, and in my view, autonomous weapons are essentially here, in the sense that if in Gaza the average review time of a target was 20 seconds, I'm just not sure how distinguishable that is from automation. And so I think that conversation about what it does and what it makes permissible is very relevant to that space as well. We think a lot about what are the ways that we can influence platform and technology companies to think about redesign that is conflict sensitive. And I can talk more about that maybe separately because it's broader than this Sudan thing, but I wanted to address at least a little bit of those points. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to you guys, Hussam and Ithar. And I'm still hoping that we're going to have time for a couple more questions from the online audience. So maybe if you each want to speak, and then we'll take a few final questions from online. Hussam, go for it.
Thanks, Elena. I think you have covered most of the things, but I want to cover 2 to 3 more things. First of all, regarding the question that came from Harriet, around understanding how SAF are framing the civilians. When the war started, we just have the FFC, the Freedom for Citizen Change at that time. But this have changed. So right now, it's everyone who is calling for peace, despite if he's part of Sumud or if he against that. It doesn't matter. If you are calling for peace, you are going to be accused of being a supporter of the RSF. It doesn't matter. If you are asking for a country that's controlled by that is led by the civilians, not by the army, you are back in the RSF. Even if your page is full of criticism to the RSF, if you are exposing all of the atrocities that the RSF is doing, even if you are a human rights defender, it doesn't matter. You will be accused as a RSF backup. Going back to the influencer thing that Elena highlighted, I think this is a very important piece of work because we can't work directly with the warring parties. We can't just reach out to the army and ask them to change the way that they are thinking, but we can reach out to the influencers who are affiliated with the warring parties, and we can just try to understand their political. We are not going to ask them. We don't even going to ask them to change their political stance. But what we can do is just try to take them to a different path. You can keep the political stance in a depolarized way, which is this is how we are working with the influencers. Let's try to do. You can just keep supporting the army, but you can do that in a depolarized way. There is no. I know that might be ironic at first, but in fact that will lead to a behavior change at last. And we have an example for that. One of the supporters, one of the influencers who are affiliated with SAF, worked with us on that, and then after 2 months, our work with her ended. When the war anniversary came 3 months after, she convened the group of influencers to call for peace, which is something quite interesting because we didn't ask her to do that. She convened these people by herself, and then she called me and said, Hussam, my way of doing both have changed because the thing that we have worked together on, it had changed my mind, and we never asked her to change her political stance. She's still supporting the army, but she's trying to say that talking about this isn't a betrayal right now. So this is an interesting thing. The other thing is the de-escalation thing, the digital de-escalation. As Elena mentioned, most of the Sudanese are talking about that. In fact, just 2 days ago, I went back to read the Jeddah Declaration, and I found that they spoke about that explicitly in the agreement. So the warring parties themselves, they agreed that if they want to reach a truce or a ceasefire, they need to de-escalate what's happening on the online space. So I think there is an opportunity to do something in that. We are trying to do this right now, and we hope that we will be succeeded. But the final thing that I want to highlight is Mirsal. Mirsal is a chatbot. It's a consultation chatbot. We have 9,000 subscribers on Mirsal right now, and it was formed during the Taqaddum conference, and then we ended by relaunching Mirsal under the supervision of the Sudan of an independent Sudanese committee from different parties, and in fact, this tool is being used just to run digital consultation with the Sudanese on the online spaces. So we have run 5 consultations so far, and we got more than over 260,000 votes on more than 3,500 statements that being wrote by thousands of Sudanese. I think we had on the past months we have 7,000 something participant, active participant in the consultations themselves, and in fact 40% of those participants are coming from Sudan. They say that they are in Sudan and they are participating from inside the country. So what we are trying to do in Mirsal, it's not just only creating a chatbot that can talk with people about different things, but what we are trying to do is try to create a community. And we are so proud of the community that we are having now, because in fact this community is quite interested in having this sort of dialogue in this safe space, and they are reflecting themselves in a very clear and open way. And I have to add this, that when the Berlin conference happened on the 15th of April this year, we ran a consultation around the conference, and we asked the Sudanese what are the priorities. What priority do they think that it should be part of this conference? And in fact, in 16 days, 1,600 people have participated, and in fact, we got more than 850 statements, and these things were voted on by the participants for more than 61,000 times, or votes were casted among these statements, and it was shared with our community and also with those in the Berlin conference. And I think you can also find the results in our website, and maybe we can just post it in the chat in a few minutes. So yeah, it's not easy to do all of these things, but we are trying to navigate in a very complex situation with a very complex and different actors. But what we are trying to do is to understand what's really happening on the online space, and how we can come together to combat with the harms that's been occurring in different places and in different ways. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Ifad, I'm going to pass it to you for a short comment in case you have anything to add. And then I know we're almost at time, but we're going to go over a little bit because we have so many good questions. So Megan's going to bring up a few final questions from the online space. Yeah, so Ifad, back to you.
I'm going to comment on the last part about migrating to other social media platforms. I'm afraid that's going to be very tricky. There is a gap between platforms appearing in the West and them coming to our side of the world, and for people to adopt them. Plus, after war, people are dealing with the social media platforms, like Facebook specifically, as a home away from home. Those who left, who had to move out of their homes, whether they're still inside Sudan or outside of Sudan, this is the community they still feel safe in. There is a reason why they are attached to it. And while it's not a safe community right now, it's still for them, it's home. For many of us, it's still. So I'm seeing it's gonna be really tricky for people to migrate to another platform, and it's gonna be really hard to change the behavior on those platforms. So I'm with you. I'm afraid that we are just coming up with new words to same old solutions, and we're not getting anywhere. For now, we're researching, we're examining the situation, we're talking about it. I don't think we're at a place where we're doing something different or new. And I do hope we all can come together and like find some new way to do things, because apparently old ways are failing us. So let's hope collectively we can come up with something new with that regards.
Thanks, Megan.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for all of the questions online. We have many more than we'll be able to get through, but we're reading them all, and I'll make sure that all of the even just comments are passed on to the panelists. There's one that is kind of connected to another, and this is just around the fact that one of the key weaknesses that has been identified is the shortage of skilled or experienced journalists. The fact that many have been displaced or exiled, and that's left a significant skill gap. So this question is just around how we're considering that in the research and perhaps the impact of that. Linked to that, there's a piece around how Build Up has been actually working with other local or other types of media organizations to try and kind of address this information vacuum. They mentioned that there, of course, were major funding challenges, but other hurdles that we're facing. And then maybe just kind of while we're thinking about the different actors in the space, in case you did want to expand, Elena, there was a question around whether Build Up have engaged in advocacy efforts directed towards social media platforms specifically, and if so, what kind of reaction we might have received.
Sam, you want to go first? And then I'll take the one on platforms at the end.
Yeah, for the journalist, author what I've mentioned, I think there is a gap of capacity in Sudan, which is understandable, by the way, because what happened and what occurred was very big, very massive, and many they were trying to just to fill the gap, to fill the vacuum in different ways, but because of the lack of the funding, because of the lack, also for those who are in Sudan, where the majority of the journalists, to make them to flee to different countries, and then to create a new life for them, and then to ask them to come back with these things. So we have to understand that they are not privileged enough just to be safe to come back with what's happening online on daily basis. Whereas many of those who should do these things can't do it because they have to run after the cost of their life, of their own life on daily basis. They have to do different things, and they can't do it easily. So that's why supporting them, funding them, try to have new ways of supporting this sort of sport are quite important. I think because this research Thelwat referred to is by Thompson. I think Thompson is trying to do a very good job with the journalist. But I think we should do always more. The thing that what was the next question, Megan? Sorry, it fell out.
Any challenges that we have faced in doing this work?
With the tech companies, in fact, what we are trying to do now is to convene the Sudanese to identify their local approach in addressing the digital harms, and how we can have an understanding for the minimum standards to escalate what's happening in the digital space, and then we can reach out to the tech companies to ask them to do like special measurements for Sudan, and something. It's something that we are working on right now. We didn't reach out to the companies yet, but we are willing to do so after our Sudanese partners comes with their own ask to the companies, and then we can work with them.
And maybe I can just dovetail from that to say that this ask to the tech companies isn't going to come out of nowhere. We are trusted partners of Meta and trusted flaggers for TikTok. As Hussam rightly pointed out, the ability to have a dialogue with X is pretty limited, so that may not be as effective. That is something that is very much something we're thinking about. And then the other thing is, Hussam mentioned this idea of special measures, or break the glass measures, platforms often call them. One of the kind of pieces of thinking that we're doing is, in general, whether, and this is in collaboration with colleagues at the Needy Center, whether we could think about essentially thinking about the time around peace processes, around ceasefires, in the same way that platforms think about the time around elections, where they do in fact have break the glass measures. So there's sort of some general advocacy that ties into the Sudan specific advocacy. We are out of time. So Ethad, I want to say, did you have one final thought on these questions that were raised? Because I want to make sure if you had anything remaining to say that you say it now, and otherwise we're going to wrap it up. So final thoughts from you?
Final thought would be what has been said, that work in the ground is as important as online work. And I think because our focus is online work, we need to do more collaboration in terms of offline work, because it's not going to change one-sided. And I think we're all putting an effort to make that happen. And yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Ethad. I love that that's the closing thoughts, because obviously we've been focusing on the online. That doesn't mean that by any means we think this is the only way to work, or the most important is just the focus of what's happening today, but a lot of respect for all of the work that is happening offline as well in Sudan. Thank you to everyone who is online. Thanks to Sam and Ethad for all your thoughts, and yeah, goodbye from over here as well.